Chapter 38. Meanwhile, back on the East Coast. In April of 1984, Jack and Jerry Brisco sold their shares in Georgia Championship Wrestling to Vince McMahon. Even though nobody saw that sale coming, I was well aware of their unhappiness with the way the Georgia territory was going, and of the problems they were having with their co-owner and booker, Ole Anderson. Some time back, Jack and Jerry asked me if I would be comfortable replacing Ole as booker in Georgia should the situation arise, and I said I would, but added that I would have to clear it with Jimmy Crockett first. I went to talk with Jimmy, and told him that there was a possibility that the Briscos would ask Ole to step down as booker, and if they did, they had offered me his job, and I was interested in taking it. I added, if you would keep it to yourself I would really appreciate it. That week, Ole was in town for a big show at the Charlotte Coliseum, and Jimmy called me into a back room. I walked in and saw Ole Anderson standing there. "What's this I hear about you coming to take my booking job?" he barked. "I'm not coming to take your job," I told him. "If someone loses their position it's no longer their job, and if the Briscos ask you to resign as the booker, I would be interested in that particular job once again." Ole just stood there and looked at me. I reasoned, "Ole, what would you expect? If Jimmy offered you the job to be the booker here, would you or would you not take it? Would you mind taking the job if Dory, Wahoo, Werney, and I were being let go?" Ole shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, I guess not. I've known Ole since 1971, and he doesn't have the greatest personality in the world. In the ring, he was a bully who could shoot a little bit, and if you didn't know how to wrestle, he would make you look like a fool. If you had guts, though, he wouldn't mess with you. As a booker, Ole was harsh on talent, much like Bill Watts. He was very blunt and would tell you exactly what he thought. Ole did a tremendous job as a booker for Jim Barnett, even though they never really gelled together. Jim respected Ole's work ethic, but Ole is a very outspoken guy, and Ole just looked at Jim as some gay guy. While I do have a lot of respect for Ole Anderson on his best day was never as sharp as Jim Barnett on his worst day. Once the deal was made between the Briscos and Vince McMahon, any talk of me replacing Ole as booker ended, and, more importantly, Vince got Georgia Championship Wrestling's time slot on TBS. That was a tremendous deal for the WWF, because TBS was the flagship station for the National Wrestling Alliance. Vince already had the USA Network locked up, but in 1984 that was considered a small, growing network. TBS, however, was the almighty powerhouse station that was well known for airing 2 hours of wrestling every Saturday night. As soon as that deal went down, the NWA promoters went into panic mode, and began discussing ways to pool their talent together in order to fight back. The biggest advantage Vince had there was that he was a committee of one making the decisions as to what was best for the WWF, while the NWA promoters were a committee of many worried about themselves and their individual promotions, rather than the NWA as a whole. Jimmy Crockett, in particular, wanted to fight the WWF head-on in their own turf, rather than wait for Vince to come to the Carolinas, so he booked a show at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. Keep in mind that at the time, the WWF was not running shows in the Carolinas, so he was basically acting out of anger, frustration, and fear, and there was no solid reason he had to book that show in New Jersey. Even though it was presented as a joint promotion with what was left of the Georgia office, it was really a Jimmy Crockett show, because Ole Anderson didn't have any money. Jimmy asked me to appear on the card, which was dubbed a Night of Champions, and since everyone had to get medical clearance and have the proper New Jersey license to appear on the show, Jimmy sent me to this doctor in downtown Charlotte. As I was sitting in the waiting room before my appointment with the doctor, he walked out of his office and looked as if he had been sent by Central Casting for a horror flick. He was so frightening looking that there was no way I was going to let him examine me, so I stood up and left. I went to Jimmy's office and told him, "There is no way I will use that doctor to get cleared for New Jersey. I wouldn't even let him examine my dog." I tried scheduling an appointment with another doctor, but getting cleared to appear on a wrestling card in New Jersey was very hard, and not something that could quickly get done, so I just couldn't get my clearance in time, and ended up not appearing on the show. During this time, Jim Barnett had gone to work for the WWF. One day, Jim called and asked me to have the fabulous Freebirds call him, because Vince McMahon was interested in signing them. This was during the whole Cyndi Lauper Rock and Wrestling Connection deal. I called Michael Hayes up, told him that Jim Barnett wanted to talk with him, and passed on Jim's phone number. Soon after, Jim Barnett called again, asking if I could help them secure Kamala, who by that time was on my crew in North Carolina. I told Jim I would, and I followed through on that as well. So in the summer of 1984, I actually served as the conduit in getting the fabulous Freebirds and Kamala into the WWF. Now, before you get any funny ideas about how I was sabotaging the NWA from the inside, let's think about this logically. If I didn't pass along Jim's message, Do you really think that the WWF wouldn't have pursued the fabulous Freebirds and Kamala any further? Yes, as a booker for the NWA, I felt a little guilty about helping the opposition secure great talent, but at the same time, I was doing a favor for Jim, and simply passing along a message to Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, Buddy Roberts, and Kamala. And if I didn't, someone else would have. Plus, my mindset was that Vince McMahon couldn't hire every wrestler out there. I knew that whenever he would bring in one of ours, someone from the NWA, he would have to get rid of one of his, otherwise he would inflate his crew and implode. As just one example, during this time, everyone was making a big deal over the fact that Vince took Hulk Hogan from Vern Gagne's American Wrestling Alliance, but within a year of that acquisition, Vince let Sergeant Slaughter go, who was over tremendously as a babyface, and he ended up in the American Wrestling Alliance. That was a big coup for the American Wrestling Alliance, because Sergeant Slaughter was a big star. So it was only logical to me that if Vince were to get one of ours, we would eventually get one of his, because he had to let a guy go and be out there. That was the way I played the game, and that was how I conducted my business. Tully Blanchard had just come into the Mid-Atlantic territory, and one night we were in Raleigh. He was listening to me discuss a match with my guys, and he butted in, "Why don't you do what's best for the town rather than what's best for you?" I shot back, "It's best you keep your mouth shut. If you have anything to say about the way I'm running this town, go tell Jimmy Crockett about it. I don't want any of your games in my dressing room." Tully was a difficult guy to do anything with, and was a troublemaker. He was the type to come into a territory and on his first day presume he knew how to run the promotion better than anyone else. I'm sure that he had hard feelings over the war that I had with his father in Texas, and didn't like the fact that I was now his boss. However, his insinuation that I was using my position as booker to take care of me and mine was completely baseless, and something I never did. A lot of bookers would go into a territory, book themselves on top every night, pay themselves really good, and screw everyone else around. Then when the boys would complain, the booker would blame the promoter for being cheap. I knew better than that, because the worst thing a booker can do is feature themselves, because it just makes the rest of the talent mad. Then the boys have all the ammunition they need when they go to the office, and complain the booker isn't giving anyone else a chance because they're hogging the main events for themselves. I must admit, though, that I would take advantage of my position and book myself along the Carolina coast so that I could take my family with me and we could enjoy the beaches. There were smaller towns and I made less money, but I really didn't care. During 1984, I managed Bob Orton and Don Coronado, who were the NWA World Tag Team Champions. As I mentioned earlier, even though a lot of NWA territories had World Tag Team titles, they were really just regional belts. The World Tag Team title in the Carolinas, however, were unofficially considered the legitimate World Tag Team title for the NWA, because the Mid-Atlantic Territory was geographically the largest NWA-sanctioned territory, and consisted of many states. I was also reunited with my old friend Ivan Koloff, and started managing him again. At the time, he was breaking in his nephew Nikita, and I became his manager, as well. However, I wasn't acting like the Gary Hart of old. Even though I was presented with a great, young piece of talent like Nikita Koloff, I didn't take the reins and help develop his career like I had in the past with young wrestlers like Gino Hernandez and the Von Erichs. Instead, I more or less just showed up and stood by his side. That was extremely unusual for me, because there was nothing I loved more than developing fresh, new talent. Jimmy Crockett probably figured I would have jumped at the opportunity to help mold Nikita's career and relish every second of it, but I didn't. In retrospect, I was emotionally exhausted, and had been through a very traumatic few months. First, Jason fell out of the tree, then one of my favorite people, David Von Erich, died, and finally, I went through my breakup with the great Kabuki. 1984 was not shaping up to be a good year for me. My wife and Doris Von Erich were always very close, and they would call each other occasionally. One day, my wife was talking with Doris and she handed me the phone saying, "Fritz is on the line. He wants to talk to you." I got on the phone with him, and he asked how the family was and how I was doing in North Carolina working for Jimmy Crockett. Fritz looked at Jimmy as a know-nothing drunk who inherited his father's business. He had no respect for him at all, and it really annoyed him that when I left Texas I went to work for him. Fritz then told me, "I'm thinking of turning one of my most popular babyfaces, Chris Adams, heel, but in order for it to be done right, I need you involved. Would you ever consider returning to Texas to help me out with this?" Now I'm sure you're wondering why, after the way things ended between us, I would even consider going back to work for him. The simple answer is because my wife was a Texan, and my children were Texans, and it was time to go home. Plus, with the emotional year I had, I really needed a rest, and a place where I didn't have very much responsibility, because I was really getting tired of being a booker. It was 1984 and I had been booking non-stop for 10 years, since 1974 in Florida under Bill Watts. When I was booking Texas, I would get phone calls from different promoters asking if Mark Lewin was interested in booking their territory. Whenever I would pass their message on to Mark, he would say that he didn't want to be a booker anymore, and that he just wanted to hang out. At the time, I couldn't understand his mindset, but by 1984, I completely understood. By 1984, my life and my priorities had gotten to the point where booking took up too much of my time, and it limited me from doing the things that I really wanted to do, like spend time with my family. I accepted Fritz's offer and went to Jimmy Crockett to give my notice. He thanked me for my time in North Carolina, and surprised me by telling me that Dusty Rhodes was coming in as the new booker. Dusty was booking Florida at the time, but was looking to step up. As I detailed earlier, Eddie wasn't really friendly with the cash, and Jimmy Crockett dropped a bundle for Dusty to come in. Everyone in the Carolinas was very happy that Dusty was coming in, because his track record in Florida was phenomenal. Even Dory Funk was happy, because he was effectively trading places with Dusty, and was going to be the new booker in Florida. As tough as that year had been, my time spent working for Jimmy Crockett was wonderful. He has a great heart and was an honest and true friend.